Welcome to the Brute Strength Podcast, bringing you worldwide experts from all areas of health and fitness. We cover training, nutrition, coaching, and mindset. Welcome your host, strength and conditioning coach, 2012 and 2013 CrossFit Games champ, Michael Cazue. Mind, body, brute.
Hello. Welcome back. This is Michael Cazue, and you're listening to the Brute Strength Podcast. This week, I've got Greg Nuckols on the show. Greg is the founder of Stronger by Science, the online home for thinking lifters. On his site, he puts out a ton of content, and I think what Greg is best known for is the content that he's put out over a number of years, particularly in the form of articles. He started out by starting his own blog and then writing for Juggernaut for a long time. And then now, he, along with a number of other experts in strength and conditioning, nutrition science, etc., put together something called MASS, Monthly Applications in Strength Sports, which is I think it's a monthly subscription. It's some sort of subscription where they put together the highest quality articles, the best articles in strength and exercise science. He's written for Men's Health, Muscle and Fitness, Elite FTS, Men's Fitness, and so many more very high profile magazines and online and websites and such. And this dude is fascinating because he's only 27 years old. And not only has he achieved a lot of notoriety and gotten a lot of respect by his peers in the community, but he's also a very wise young man. So if you've been listening to the show at all, for any amount of time, you know that I'm really drawn to people with some depth that are willing to be introspective, and Greg certainly is. So this was a real pleasure for me to do. This interview really went all over the place without a real central theme, but we did talk about the importance of actually practicing things in learning versus just reading and watching videos, how he's checked his ego over the years and the impact that that's allowed him to have, which has been much more than when he was a little cockier when he was younger. We talk about how to think scientifically in both training and in life, and what to do when you lose motivation. So I really thoroughly enjoyed this conversation, and I know you will too. So without further ado, please welcome Greg Nuckols. Greg, welcome to the show, man.
Yeah, thanks for having me on.
Stoked to have you, dude. Like I was saying before, I am not super interested in talking about like X's and O's and how many reps and sets people should be doing anymore. But I am really fascinated by you because I think I first heard about you from my wife, Adi, who you trained with a number of times. And I remember when we first met, her telling me about this absolute phenom, this young phenom in strength and conditioning. And I think at the time you must have been like 21 or 22. And I did a little bit of research back then, and I found out that you were really well respected. And I looked you up, and you already seemed really wise and insightful, which are a couple values that I really value. So anyway, today I want to talk about how you think. I want to dive into some of your funny Instagram posts and just see where we go.
Sounds good. Yeah. So back then it was mostly just due to having a beard. So no one knew how old I was.
It's hilarious. I mean, you could pass off for 40, 45 right now.
Yeah.
Thick ass beard.
It's wild, dude. So there are times when I'll go to like Harris Teeter and buy beer, and they have the signs hanging up that say, it's like a grocery store down here. And they have signs hanging up that say, like, we card everyone who looks under 40. And if I'm like sleep deprived and haggard enough, I occasionally don't get carded.
That's amazing.
So, yeah, I mean, I'll take it.
That's awesome, dude. One of those funny Instagram posts that I was speaking of was, I think you had just defended your master's thesis. It must have been pretty recent. And you said, I don't have any awesome photo because taking pictures takes a piece of your soul, creating a Horcrux. I was dying.
Yeah,
I mean, fucking hilarious.
I have, so everyone has different niches within their audience online. And I have a fair amount of Harry Potter fan followers and a fair amount of Amish followers. But I find not that many people particularly cater to the Harry Potter Amish like the overlap of that Venn diagram.
Right.
So just hyper targeted content, like knowing my audience, you know.
God, you're a visionary business leader, man. That's amazing. So you told me you had a funny story for me, and in text, it really doesn't sound that funny, but let's give it a shot. You said you once tricked someone into believing that a kilo was almost exactly 2 pounds. What's the story?
Yeah, I mean, so this isn't that funny, but whatever, fuck it. Am I allowed to swear, by the way?
Absolutely. You're
Okay,
encouraged to,
cool.
actually.
Um, so yeah, I mean, I don't have that many funny stories that I would necessarily feel comfortable telling to a wide audience, but this is a little amusing. So
The Amish don't come here.
that's
Just
good.
FYI.
So most Americans obviously don't know how kilos work. Weightlifters do, CrossFitters do, powerlifters do now since most federations have switched over to kilos.
Oh,
But
interesting.
back in like 2012, 2013, they didn't. And so I had a buddy who it was one of the worst cases of just a mental block against being able to hit a number that I'd ever seen.
Mm-hmm.
So he was very close to a 500-pound squat, but as soon as you would put that fifth plate on the bar, it was like he had never squatted before. Like just complete and utter breakdown. Um, but like I knew he was good for it. He'd done like 475 for 5. And this was a power lifter. This wasn't a CrossFitter. Like I do know that some people who just have really good strength endurance, if you can get it for 1, you can get it for 3 or 4. Like that wasn't this dude. Like he had a typical level of power lifter strength endurance. And so he'd done like 475 for 5. I knew he was good for 500, but he'd failed it like 5 or 6 times in training. And so this is when I was training at MASH. And since there were a lot of weightlifters training there were a lot of kilo plates around the place. And so I was like, let's see if I can trick him into squatting 500 pounds. And so started putting kilo plates on the bar. And he's like, what's the kilo to pound conversion again? And I was like, it's like 2.04, but like it's basically a pound is a kilo is 2 pounds. And he's like, okay,
And for
that
those
works.
listening that don't know, it's actually 2.2. So if you
Yeah.
multiply that a couple hundred times, that makes a big difference.
Right. So started working up. He was thinking a kilo is 2 pounds. Work up. He gets 220 easy, gets 230 pretty easy. So that's like 507, 508. So like he had already broken through at that
And
point.
what are you doing? You're just like concealing your expression?
Oh, just cool as a cucumber. Right. Got 240. It was a bit of a grind, but it went up. So that's 529.
Oh, shit.
And then put 250 on. And it looked like all of the times he had previously attempted 500. Because at that point, he thinks he's doing 500. Goes down, out of control, grinds at it for like half a second and gives up. And he's like super disappointed. He's like, failed 500 again. This is terrible. I was like, nah, dude, you just did 529. Barely, like you just missed 551.
Dude,
you're good.
That's crazy.
So, I mean, I guess that's a little funny, but that's the best I got.
Yeah, it's not very funny, but it's awesome. That is super cool. I wish there were a way to like repeat that with people. You can only get them with that once.
Yeah, we could start making like Newton plates.
I don't get it. I don't get it. What would that do? What are
so newtons aren't a measure of mass, it's a measure of force, but since gravity would be the only thing acting on it, it would just be like another type of way you could fool people.
Yeah. Or have some way of making it, I don't know, having the same size and an unknown weight and like a same size plate, and the coach is the only one that knows how much it weighs.
Yeah, that would be pretty cool. Or just like accumulate a set of poorly manufactured plates, because if you're not buying like the nice like Rogue or Alico shit, plates can vary anywhere from like 40 pounds to 50 pounds if they say they're 45. So you could just take a scale into like a Dick's Sporting Goods and weigh all of their plates and like only buy the ones that are 49 or 50 pounds and use that as a way to trick people. That might be fun.
I like it. Man, that's fascinating. Have you ever come across any other ways to help people through those mental barriers?
I know something that some people swear by, which I've never experimented with, is just putting trash bags on the bar. So the lifter simply can't see how much weight is going on.
Have you seen that work or heard of that working?
Yeah, I've heard of it working. I just don't have any experience with it myself.
Yeah.
Let's see. I've tricked people into little PRs by having them use like a squat bar for bench instead of a regular bench bar. I'm like, yeah, like it's a little thicker, but it's slightly less dense metal. It's still 45 pounds, but it's 55. But yeah, I mean, I think the biggest thing for most people is I think a lot of folks who are just used to training in commercial gyms, if you get them into a really good strength sports gym or probably a really good CrossFit box, they can just automatically set like a 20-pound PR just from the atmosphere. Right. I know that affects me a lot, but yeah, in terms of actually fooling people, the pounds to kilos is my go-to. And if someone knows kilos, I'm at that point powerless.
Yeah. Well, somebody out there, please make some kind of sleeve so we don't have to use trash bags, some kind of nice looking mental block sleeve. And then give us each, I don't know, 7.5%.
You know, the bar that they use for squats at World's Strongest Man from time to time, I don't know if they've done this recently, but they used to use an implement where basically it was a bar with like drums on either side, and then you could put plates on normal sleeves within the drum and then put the sides of the drum on. So someone watching it on TV, it just looks like this one big thick unit, but it was still a plate loaded device. And I know they make circus dumbbells that are similar to that as well. So, I mean, in principle, that could be done with a barbell.
Interesting. Love it, man. Okay, so let's get into you being the phenom of strength sports at 22 years old. When did this obsession with strength and conditioning start for you?
I mean, I guess when I got into powerlifting when I was like 14, 15, and that happened because I basically got too hurt to play real sports anymore. Just a lot of repeated concussion issues, and powerlifting is a sport where if you do sustain head trauma, it's because you did something really, really wrong.
Right.
And so that got me into powerlifting, and that just got me obsessed with strength training in general.
So were you pretty great at it right off the bat?
Yeah. I took to it like a duck to water. So the first time, there's a little more backstory to this. Like I had tried to bench press a few times previously when I was younger, but when I first like actually started training seriously when I was like 14, the first time I maxed in earnest with like a standard plate set, etc. I benched 275. And the first time I deadlifted, I pulled 405.
What?
So
at 14?
Yeah.
Dear God, what were you weighing?
I was like 150.
What?
Yeah, I was a little guy. I was a basketball player. So I think a lot of that had to do with like farm work and manual labor growing up. So even though I hadn't, lifted a barbell off the ground, I had picked a lot of heavy things up off the ground prior to that point. But yeah, took to it pretty well.
No wonder you were obsessed. You were probably winning state championships the first year.
Yeah. So actually, I had occasion to check back on this a couple weeks ago because someone mentioned that I was a good powerlifter as a teenager. I was like, Yeah, I think some of the numbers I hit in the 14 and 15-year-old division are still like near the top of the record books.
That's awesome, man.
And apparently, so the class I settled into was the 181 class. And I think to this day, my like 14, 15-year-old numbers, I think I had like the second best squat and deadlift, maybe the fifth best bench, and the second best total of all time in like that age and weight division.
Mm-hmm.
And they were the best ever at the time. So yeah, I mean, and that was within, I don't know, maybe like 6 months of taking the sport seriously.
Yeah.
So yeah, I took to it pretty well. One thing to keep in mind though is like teenage strength sports records and really just teenage sports in general. It's kind of dumb because it's a matter with any sport. Part of it is just, are you genetically gifted for it?
Mm-hmm.
Part of it's, do you train hard and do you train well? But then the other variable for teenage sports is how early did you hit puberty?
Right.
And so one of the things helping me out there is like I haven't grown since I was like 12 years old. Um, I started shaving at 10.
Wow.
Probably entered puberty at like 8.
Don't
So
you
by
dare
14,
take this away from yourself, Greg.
well, by like 15 years old, I was physically an adult.
Right.
So in my head, there's like an asterisk next to those numbers because, if you've ever watched the Little League World Series and you see some of those kids who are allegedly 11 years old but look like adults pitching to children,
Mm-hmm.
like that was me growing up.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, I mean, of course I was going to be better at lifting than the typical 14, 15-year-old.
Right. Very humble of you. So what happened next, man? What happened next in your kind of journey of becoming a thought leader in this space?
I wouldn't really consider myself a thought leader now. I'm just a guy who
No humble
blogs
thought
from
leader
time to
would.
time. But yeah, I mean, just stuck with lifting. Went to college initially. So if I have a weakness, it's that I never plan ahead for literally anything,
Mm-hmm.
and never like scout out options. And so I didn't know what one could do if one was interested in the gym and coaching and whatnot, other than like being a personal trainer or trying to work up through the ranks of like collegiate or professional S&C, which even in high school I had heard was not a great gamble for most people because, there's thousands of people who want those jobs and really only a small handful of people who are able to stick with it long enough and work up high enough to make a decent living from it.
And you have to be a little crazy to work your way up those ranks. You have to grind so hard for so long, for the most part.
Yeah, for sure. And so like I just didn't know that there were really any other options out there. So the other thing that I really liked in school was history. So I went into college as a history major. Got to got to the senior seminar class, realized I didn't actually want any of the jobs that I could get with a history degree. Again, not thinking or planning ahead. And then I just said like, well, fuck it. Like I'm into lifting. I like coaching. I'm just going to do exercise science and hope for the best. So that's what I did. And then in terms of, I guess, like making a name for myself, a lot of that was just dumb luck. So my plan was after college, I was going to go back and work at Travis's gym. And I mean, like, I probably would have become somewhat well known just because Travis has become pretty well known, but he wasn't really at that time. And, I just wanted to coach people. Like, I thought that was super fun. But then my wife got an internship opportunity out in California, which you can't really swing the North Carolina to California commute very well.
Yeah.
And so I ended up getting a job working for Juggernaut as the content manager. And that's when I started. So I had just like a little blog before, but that's when I started taking that more seriously.
And how
and
old are you
then
at this point?
22.
Okay.
And so that's when things started taking off. But that was purely dumb luck. And having a website in the first place was also purely dumb luck because like I'm obsessed with lifting and I used to talk about it all the time. I mean, I still do. But the person I would talk about it with or talk, yeah, I think that's the correct conjugation. Anyway, was my then girlfriend, now wife. And I think, I mean, she's my training partner. She's also into lifting, but not like as into lifting. And so I would just get on her nerves. And she said, like, why don't you start a blog to try to find other people to chat about this with who are as obsessed as you are? So without that, I wouldn't have had the site. And without her getting that internship, I wouldn't have kind of gone the online thought leader, if you will, route.
Right.
So yeah, I mean, just getting lucky multiple times in a row.
So at some point I know you got into grad school and you had sort of a perspective shift around doing research. Can you tell us about that?
I don't really know that I had a perspective shift. I think it's just that helped deepen my perspective. Because I knew kind of on paper what went into doing research before actually helping out with research and then doing my own research. But it's just like with anything else. Like you can have like a mental understanding of something. You can have book knowledge about something, but until you actually do it, you don't fully understand it, I don't think. So yeah, I mean, it helped me understand research better, actually going and doing it. But I don't know that it fundamentally changed my perspective on it.
Gotcha. Can you break that down anymore? Like what did you understand that you hadn't before?
I mean, realistically, just how hard it is. I think that I'm a little bit less critical of research than I used to be, because and especially training studies, because like, dude, it's so many fucking hours. Like, so let's say you're running a study, not particularly big, but let's say 40 participants, and it's running for 8 weeks, and each subject is being trained 3 times a week for an hour. So that's 3 hours per subject per week, which is 120 hours a week for 8 weeks.
And you have to train them individually?
Yeah.
Oh, shit.
Yeah, like it's pretty rare for a study to use group training.
Wow.
So that's what's 120 times 8? That's like 960 hours.
Yeah.
And then you're going to have testing visits, pre and post probably. You're going to spend a ton of time on recruitment. Like, it's hard to get 40 subjects in a study. So if you see a paper that has like 25 subjects, it's probably not because the researchers were lazy. It's probably that's just when recruitment dried up.
Right.
So I mean, all said and told, that probably about 1,200 hours went into that project. I would estimate, and depending on the size of the lab group, that could very well be split up between like 3 or 4 people. And so that's a chunk of your life where, you're probably also teaching classes. You're probably also taking classes. Like, you have other stuff going on, and you're, as a group collectively investing like 1,200 hours into this project. And so like, it's just a lot. Like, it's so much. And then like, I used to do this, and now it bothers me when I see other people doing this, when folks are like, oh, well, why didn't they take, these other 50 measures that I personally would have liked to have seen? And it's like, dude, they probably just didn't have the budget for it.
Right.
Because like, so one, if you want to know anything that's going on like molecularly, that's probably going to require a biopsy. In a lot of states, you need a doctor on staff to do that. Doctors aren't particularly cheap and often don't want to volunteer their time to biopsy a bunch of quads. And then all of the chemicals and reagents and whatnot that would go into actually like analyzing the biopsies, like they're all pretty expensive. The equipment you would need to look into it is like also super expensive. And unless you're doing like sarcopenia work, there's virtually no funding in the area. So it's just it's a tremendous amount of work, and every step of the process is super hard. And I have a much greater appreciation for that now.
Where do you fall on the spectrum of doing things that are research-based versus results-based?
I don't think that's an interpretable spectrum. Like I think that they're one and the same, honestly. So I think that if someone views them dichotomously, they probably have a fairly unnuanced view of what research is and what research is trying to accomplish. So if someone's the type of person who reads a study and they're like, oh, this is proof for X, Y, and Z, and therefore all athletes should be doing it, they're not using research to inform their practice. They just don't know what you're supposed to get out of research in the first place. Because ultimately, you're trying to do projects to uncover general principles, at least in terms of applied research, that are then going to be useful for athletes and coaches. So if you wanted to take like a very, very narrow view of research and what you can generalize from one single research project, if the person you're training isn't identical to the subjects that were included in this research, and if the training protocol you're using isn't identical to the training protocol used in the study, you can't assume that, and unless the person that you're implementing it on responds to training identically to the average person that was included in the study, which is another big factor, because like ultimately science is just looking at mean responses, which may not be the same as individual responses. But anyway, unless all of those assumptions are met, you can't really apply the findings of a study to a client you're working with. So ultimately what you're trying to do with research is uncover principles and develop a body of research that kind of points you in the right direction. So it's less giving you like MapQuest turn-by-turn directions, and more giving you like a map and a compass. And I find that the stuff that research has found also seems to be the stuff that works pretty well in the real world. And so I think the biggest advantage of it is it helps save you a lot of troubleshooting. So if, let's say you're a coach and you're just starting out and you know nothing, and you're going to probably have to train dozens or hundreds of athletes to test enough stuff on them that you can get an idea of what works generally well for most people. That process is going to take at least months and probably years to get enough people through, these concepts that you're trying to run them through until you get that good starting point. And then if you're worth your salt as a coach, you'll know that after you've established a pretty good general starting point for most people, you still have to iterate and experiment to find what works best for each individual. I think the biggest thing you get out of science is it just helps save you a fair amount of that time and effort on the front end, where you can look at the research and see like, oh, well, here's the general levels of volume that people seem to respond pretty well to. Here's the general types of frequencies that people seem to respond pretty well to. And so I think that if you take like a science-based approach or like a quote unquote results-based approach, you generally wind up in the same spot of like a starting point. And then no matter what you use as your starting point, it's still going to be a matter of iterating and experimenting with each individual athlete in the first place. So yeah, I don't see it as a spectrum. I see it as two different ways of eventually getting to the same spot.
That's really insightful, and really helpful for me. I've always, I think, listened to the voices that say, the cutting edge professionals, the people at some of the top colleges and pro teams are doing things that are 20, 30 years ahead of quote unquote science and research. And I've kind of bought into that for a long time. But what you say makes a lot of sense. It's like science is not trying to tell you exactly what to do with your clients or your athletes. It's trying to it's trying to figure something out about principles that you can then apply across hopefully a broad range.
Yeah. I'm also kind of skeptical about people being 20 or 30 years ahead of the research. So, I mean, I don't know. I'm not going to write that off as something that's completely impossible. And I'm not going to name names, but just from talking to a fair amount of like D1 strength coaches, a lot of them say that they'll say that stuff to sell their program to new recruits. So, high profile recruit comes in, you're trying to sell your school versus all of the other schools that are looking at them and that are recruiting them. Feels good to be able to go down to the strength and conditioning room and say like, oh yeah, we're 10 years ahead of everyone else. Like, it's crazy. But then when they actually get in, they're doing squats and power cleans and basic strength and conditioning that everyone is doing, and then also, I mean, to be that far ahead of the research, it's a question of both like what do you know, and then what is feasible to implement. And talking to strength coaches, the thing that they're interested in isn't some space age 30 years in the future modality that they can use to like get another 2% out of their athletes. It's like convincing their athletes to actually eat food,
right,
and show up to all of their workouts.
That is the biggest, for sure. You're exactly right.
So yeah, I mean, I'm skeptical that I'm just skeptical of that concept in the first place, just because that does not comport with what I've heard from actually talking to strength coaches in a context where we're just having a conversation and they're not trying to sell me on something.
Yeah, I really love that. I think you may have just changed my mind a little. I appreciate that. Back to your point about practicing, like knowledge gained from, like, I don't know, traditional forms of learning versus actually practicing something. Do you think that there's an issue at all with coaches just trying to learn how to be a coach and learn about strength and conditioning through reading and watching videos versus actually getting out on the floor and experimenting with athletes?
Oh, absolutely. And I think a lot of especially young strength coaches who get into coaching after getting a degree, and typically an advanced degree, I think a lot of them assume that coaching is almost perfectly synonymous with programming, and that if they can learn to write good programs, they'll be a good coach. And like, that's certainly part of it. But I mean, I would say most of coaching, like easily more than half of your like efficacy, comes from soft skills of actually knowing how to connect with athletes and get a high level of effort out of them. Which again, so it's different based on the context that you're in. So like, I've coached high school collegiate athletes. I've also coached strength sport athletes. And the soft skills that matter in those two contexts could not be more different. So, I mean, dude, with powerlifters, it's a sport where you don't get anything for being good at it. And so people only get into the sport because they're really into it, and so they love it. And occasionally people will get demotivated, and your job as a coach is kind of to get their head back in the game and whatnot. But I mean, more often than not, if you're going to have an issue, it's often people pushing themselves way too hard, working up and hitting maxes that weren't in their programs, like doing extra sets. And your job is more to kind of reel them back in and say like, dude, like, you've done this before, you've pushed too hard. Like, then we had to kind of push reset on things and get you back at a level of volume you do well with. Whereas for coaching, for doing strength coaching for athletes, like basketball players, football players, the issue often is like they just don't care about the weight room.
Right.
Like they're into their sport, and then your job is more like, how do we get them actually invested in doing their squats and deadlifts and cleans and everything else. And so like, yeah, there, and also like, dude, everything goes better if your athletes like you. And well, either if they like you or they're scared of you. And I think a lot of strength coaches go the scary route, which is probably just based on their experiences with strength coaches when they played high school and college sports. But I mean, you got to do something to get buy-in. And I think that I think a lot of people who are kind of like the dweeby science-y type who definitely can't pull off the fear thing,
right?
And just don't have the interpersonal skills to be likable for college athletes or whoever they're trying to coach. You just can't connect with them on any level. Like they struggle, even if they can write really good programs. So yeah, I mean, like coaching is definitely mostly soft skills.
How much of that do you think can be trained versus born with, and how, like, what are the, like, how much of it is just becoming aware of the fact that coaching is so determined by these interpersonal skills, these soft skills?
I mean, as with most things, I think part of it's innate and part of it's teachable. I think that, I think interpersonal skills are very trainable though. So I think a lot of it comes down to confidence. If you're confident but not cocky, people, like most people, just tend to like you, and it makes life a lot easier. And I think that I think people do get better just from doing it. And again, so I mean, like, I'm not that old, but I'm gonna sound like an old fogey here. I think that's more of an issue with people coming up now than it was even for people my age and people older than me. I mean, like,
specifically,
just general interpersonal skills.
Sure. Yeah.
Like, I'm going to sound
faster.
Do what?
We can text much faster than the
younger
generations.
No, for sure. But yeah, I mean, just from interacting with I'm going to say kids, even though that's probably infantilizing, but kids coming out of school who are like 21, 22, 23, they just don't seem to, on average, have the same level of interpersonal skills that people like. I think people around my age is when things were starting to go downhill, and it's just accelerated, but they don't seem to have the same interpersonal skills as people of that same age from generations prior. Maybe it's just due to growing up with technology. I don't know, but yeah, I mean, they just seem more awkward and have more trouble with like face-to-face interactions. And I think a lot of them are going to struggle, at least starting out. But as they are forced to be on a gym floor for 8 hours a day, having face-to-face interactions with people, you have to assume they'll get better.
For sure. Yeah, I came across a startling article a while back about the effect that social media has had on people's stress levels. And they found that when, I think just around the time that social media came out, they saw a dramatic increase in childhood anxiety and depression. So I think we're going to be seeing the effects of that coming down the pipeline in the next several years.
That's not too surprising to me.
Yeah. Yeah, man. So you told me that you were, before the show, you said that you were a lot cockier when you were younger, and now you're generally happy to just be kind of behind the scenes and deferring credit to others. Tell me a little bit about what your mindset was when you were a little bit younger and what changed in you to have you feel the way you do now?
I don't know. I used to just be hyper competitive. Um, whatever I was doing, it was a competition, and I wanted to win, and I wanted people to know that I won. Um, and I mean, maybe that's just from being a little brother. Um, who knows? But yeah, I mean, that's just kind of how I was wired. And then I don't know. As I've gotten older, I think I've just kind of mellowed out, and it's more about thinking like, what am I actually trying to accomplish here? And I don't know. I feel like I in general have the respect of my peers, and so I don't feel like I need to go out and do something for the glory, because one, I think my standing in my community is fine, and I don't know that that would accomplish much, and just don't really care about it that much anymore. And what I'm trying to accomplish is more like, just making sure I'm getting good information out to as many people as possible. And if, if it helps for me to be the one conveying that information and using my platform to do it, cool. If there's someone else, so something that I do all the time, and again, like, I'm not going to name names here because I don't want them to feel like I'm putting them on blast. But if I see a video getting shared, for example, from like a big YouTuber, who is reaching way more people than I am, and they're saying stuff that's incorrect, um, I'll just message them very politely and say like, "Hey, would you mind talking about this?" Uh, and then giving them the correct information and being like, "Yeah, if you correct this or make another video." A lot of people want to save face. They don't want to put out a correction. They just want to make another video on the same topic like 3 months later where they completely change their opinion but don't have to admit that they were wrong.
And they don't understand. I don't think they realize that if they did it that way and they owned up, people would probably like them more.
It depends on the audience.
Yeah.
So if we were the audience, I think that would be the case. A lot of the YouTube audience is like 16-year-old kids, and if you ever admit to them that you were wrong about anything, you've suddenly lost all credibility.
Yeah, that's fair.
But yeah, so whatever, they do it in a way that fits with their audience, and I tell them like, you don't have to give me any credit on this. Like, your audience views you as an expert. They can keep viewing you as an expert. Like, this can be coming from you, not me. It's just, I think you put out some misinformation. It would probably be good if you corrected that. And like, not doing it in a confrontational way at all. But yeah, I mean, that's been reasonably successful, and it's gotten good information out to, I mean, at least hundreds of thousands of people who I wouldn't have been able to reach otherwise.
That's pretty cool, man.
Yeah, and like, ultimately something like that matters more to me than, me also getting the credit for it, because ultimately, good stuff is reaching more people. And so, like, and I mean, I don't know if it's so much wisdom as it is just like financial security. Because I think I was a lot more driven to try to like get credit and make a name for myself when I was fresh out of school and broke. I mean, at this point, like, we're fine, like, not going to wind up living under a bridge anytime soon. So I don't feel like I need to be the center of attention in a way that will possibly help me make more income. Like, I'm good just doing what I got to do to get good information out to people. And if we were less successful business wise, I don't know that would be the case.
Yeah.
I think that's given me the space to be more circumspect in kind of like a Maslow way.
What do you mean by that?
Like Maslow's hierarchy of needs. God, I forget the whole thing, but basically, like, you need to take care of the basic stuff first, where
food, water, shelter,
then like interpersonal relationships, and then once you've got all of that unlocked, then it can be more about like self-actualization and doing stuff for the greater good versus like your own self-aggrandizement. So like, I don't know, if business hadn't gone as well, and I was in a different place, like socially and financially today, I could very well do things and see things completely differently than I do.
Mm-hmm.
So like it's not like I had a path to enlightenment or anything like that. I'm just not poor anymore.
Amen, man. What happens if they don't make another video to kind of correct themselves? What do you do?
Yeah, life goes on.
Okay. I didn't know if you put them on blast.
No.
Gotcha.
That's not what I do.
Gotcha. What's something that you've changed your mind on in the past couple of years? Talking about, being humble and being willing to change our minds.
I think I'm probably a little bit less pro high frequency than I was a few years ago. So it kind of depends, like the time horizon you're talking about. So I think I still believe a lot of the same things today as I did maybe 2 years ago. Mm-hmm. But I've changed my mind about a lot of stuff if you extend that time window back to maybe like 5 or 6 years.
Yeah, go for it.
So like I used to be like super into keto. Mm-hmm. I used to be like super into West Side stuff. I was like a hardcore West Side fanboy.
So what changed there?
I think just being exposed to more stuff. So before I knew really anything about the science and before I'd been exposed to other training systems, it was kind of the same argument as like Jordan versus LeBron. If someone knows nothing about basketball, where it's just like, well, count the rings, baby, Mm-hmm. And so prior to like being exposed to other worlds in powerlifting, like the community I grew up in. So I always competed raw, but the community I came up in was like the untested, equipped lifting community. Mm-hmm. And I mean, in that world, Louis is far and away the most successful coach.
Mm-hmm. So he'd be the Jordan.
Yeah, pretty much. And so like, I didn't really know anything about raw. Well, I mean, like I competed raw, but I didn't know that there had been like a history of raw lifting prior to Equip taking over. Then like raw lifting had its resurgence. I didn't really know that much about the IPF and single ply stuff. Found out about Boris Shako, and I was like, oh, maybe there's someone out there with more rings. And then just like started getting more into the science and realized that, hey, there's some ideas out there that Louis didn't really seem to be incorporating into his stuff. And then also a lot of his stuff was based on Russian science. And when I started actually reading that stuff, I realized like it wasn't science. I mean, it wasn't like experimental research.
Right.
It was by and large
like journals of lifters or something.
Yeah, I mean that's basically what it was. Like if people were like, if some coach had coached a few good lifters or a few good athletes, mm-hmm. and they just said like, hey, here's how I set their training up, then that became accepted into the Soviet scientific canon. It wasn't the way we think of experimental research today. And then I realized like, oh, maybe this isn't the most reliable way to accrue information. But
awesome, man. So I've got a couple Instagram quotes. Yeah, I'll just read them off. The first is, on the things you really want to get right, you want to take a scientific perspective. Most things in life, we base decisions on really poor data. What do you mean by that?
What context did I say that in?
I don't remember.
Oh, can you read it back again?
On the things you really want to get right, you want to take a scientific perspective. Most things in life, we base decisions on really poor data.
So I assume what I was getting at there is, I think so. The fundamental posture you take in science is one of assuming you're wrong. I mean, like in practice, that's often not what happens, but that's kind of what you're supposed to do. You have an idea and you attempt to disprove it. And then if you're unable to, then cool, you learn something. And I think that so you're supposed to take a posture of humility and assuming that you're wrong and whittling away what is wrong to eventually find what is right, or at least less wrong. I think most of us, in most of the things we do in life, just kind of assume that we're right about virtually everything virtually all the time, which makes sense because if we didn't, it would be impossible to function. You do like, if you see something that looks like a chair, you don't want to have to do like a full examination of it to verify that yes, this is in fact a chair and something I can sit on before you do it. So and so I'm not talking like huge fundamental beliefs, but I'm just talking like you assume the world is as you believe it to be and interact with it accordingly. And so if there's something where you need to make some sort of important decision, I think it's good to start with the assumption that like, hey, there's a lot of stuff I don't know. My assumptions going into this are wrong, and I need to like investigate this really thoroughly to make sure I don't fuck something up. And that's a long process, and it's hard, and it's not the type of process that makes sense to use for 90% of what you do on a day-to-day basis, but I think it's good for the important stuff.
Right, and you make fewer mistakes.
Yeah.
Ideally, you make fewer mistakes that way. Yeah, another something along those lines that I think a lot of people think are things like, I can't trust anyone, or all people are selfish, something like that. Those are things that can definitely be tested that are a little less concrete than, is that a chair?
Yeah. Yeah, it's interesting. You can I feel like social media is an interesting Rorschach test sometimes, to see just how cynical and jaded people are. So a lot of the times if I like say or post something, there will be a lot of people who respond like generally positively to it, and then a few people who get super, super mad, and just no matter what, assume I'm trying to swindle them. So this isn't about a post, but this is actually a pretty good example. The first product we launched, it was a pair of books called The Art of Lifting and The Science of Lifting. And we had no experience selling products online. And I mean, up to this point, I had a track record of interacting with people on the internet for probably 4 or 5 years, never sold anything. And as far as I can tell, I'd been a generally decent dude, and like hadn't been a huge dick or given any indication that I was the type of person who one couldn't trust. And so we launched this product, and we used software called Gumroad to accept payments and then send out the products. And so from talking to other people, apparently Gumroad is a good service, and we just happened to launch it on a day that their software was glitching super hard or something.
Shit.
And so like for a solid like 20% of the people who bought the books, it took their payment and then didn't send the file. Like, not the file went to spam, but it just never sent. And so we got like hundreds of emails of people. Like it was a huge pain in the ass from customer support perspective. And most of the people were just like, hey, like my payment went through, the book didn't come through, what's going on? Which seems reasonable enough.
Right,
of course you want the thing you paid for, and seems like something may have messed up. But for a small minority of people, they came in fucking guns blazing, and they're like, I can't believe you did this. You fucking swindled me, you piece of shit. And it's just like, dude, come on. It was a software glitch. Why would you think that I was trying to swindle you?
Yeah.
Like I work online. Like your currency online is your reputation. And you really think that I would fuck you that hard for $27? Like,
Right.
come on. But yeah, like I see that all the time. Or just like if I share a lifting video to Instagram. So like I'm drug free, but it's not something I make a huge deal about because I just don't care that much. Like people can lift how they want to lift. I don't give a shit. But occasionally, if I hit a number that some people deem to be too big, most of the people in the comments will be like, "Oh, that's awesome. Congrats, dude." And then I'll get like a few very angry messages. Some of them are from folks who are drug free and assume that I'm lying about being drug free and trying to, give other natties false expectations.
Yeah.
But then most of the ones I get are actually from folks who are on gear and lift less than me and are really upset
Oh
about it.
God.
And so, like, yeah, I mean, it's something as innocuous as like, hey, here's a set of squats I did. A lot of people I'm sure most people feel neutral about it, and most people don't give a single shit what's going on in my life.
Right.
But the people who have an opinion, most of them positive, very small handful, so cynical and jaded, it's outrageous.
That's amazing.
So yeah, I don't really know what to make of that, but just anything you see online can be a modern Rorschach test.
Yeah. So that's a good segue into this next one, which was hilarious. You said people talk about training like they're going to war or doing something heroic. Bro, this is a hobby. If you're not having fun, why do it? I like imagining other people describing their hobbies in the same terms. Granny's a goddamn lion in the trenches with her crocheting. I was dying, man.
Man.
Why do you think people do this?
I don't know. I mean, one of the things that amuses me a little bit is some of the folks who got upset about that post were just like, this it's an outlet for people in the modern world, and like, men need to feel like they're, being heroic and going to war, and that's just like historically what it's meant to be a man, and like the modern world has taken that away from people. I don't think that's true. I mean, most people have been farmers, which like are you doing war with like your rows of grain, dude? Like that's what it has meant to be a man in most societies throughout most of history, but whatever. So I think one, that was just kind of a throwaway joke, which I think some people interpreted way too seriously. But I think like, I don't know. I wonder with people who talk about training that way, how much of it is kind of an innate thing, and if they discovered lifting weights on their own, if they would still approach it that way, and how much of it is kind of like an enculturation type thing where certain segments of the lifting community, that's like what they're all about. There's a bunch of like militaristic imagery and that's like the whole proposition, like you're going to go to war against your weakness and whatever. And so I wonder how much of that is just kind of like mimicry and looking for validation from the community that one has found for themselves. Yeah, I don't really know. I just thought it was a funny joke, because another thing people got upset about with that is that I called lifting a hobby. And I think that
what
people just don't know what
it was a craft or something. A craft or
calling. I don't know what they think it is. Like a hobby is a leisure time activity that one does for personal enjoyment or development. Like that's
they're going to work.
Yeah, like that's the literal definition of a hobby. Yeah. Like if I'm doing it because I want to and I think it'll better myself, or I just enjoy it and I'm not getting paid for it, it's by definition a hobby. And so I just thought that it would be funny if people described other hobbies that way. Like my other major hobby is cooking, and like I would just love to see someone describe like baking scones using the same language
right
that one would to describe like, fucking going to war against a hard squat workout. I don't know.
Yeah,
Just
to each his own. I can definitely relate to it a little bit, and I think it has something to do with like wanting to feel like what we're doing is important and it is heroic. And if people want to do that, so be it. But it is definitely hilarious.
yeah, I mean, so I think the thing that does like actually bother me a little bit isn't so much the overblown imagery. Like if someone wants to say like I'm a beast, like you're literally not, but like I don't care. Um like that doesn't bother me. That's like a level of cringe that one has to be fine with if you're going to be in
On the social
strength
medias.
culture at all.
Yeah.
Um the oh, so fun fact. Do you know the Brandon Lilly quote, there's no weight classes in the jungle?
No.
Oh man, so that's kind of like it's a quote that like blew up and like almost reached meme status a few years ago.
Hmm.
I was actually the person that made it reach meme status because
Nice.
it was in an article that Brandon had previously written, and it didn't gain traction there. And then when we republished it, I made like a little like image with like text over it. It was like a picture of Brandon and said like "There's no weight classes in the jungle," and that like
That's
the
amazing.
the image went viral. So I feel pretty good about that. But but yeah, so the it's specifically like the war verbiage and imagery that irks me a little bit.
Hmm.
Because I feel like it makes something that should be unspeakable casual. Um, and so I'm not like a complete pacifist, but I'm reasonably pacifistic.
Hmm.
And I think that especially in America, people are entirely too just chill about the entire concept of war. Because I mean, we've been at war since 2001. Like most of my conscious life, we've been at war.
Hmm.
Few thousand troops have died, but also like literally hundreds of thousands of civilians have died in those wars. Um, People apparently just don't care about that anymore. Like I would think that in a ethical society, that would be like one of the major issues that everyone would talk about every election cycle. And you know 18 years on, it seems like just no one gives a shit anymore.
Hmm.
um and so I don't know, like to describe anything as war that is not war, which is like unspeakably horrible, I see as almost like making light of the Holocaust,
Right.
like that same general type of thing. But like people do it so casually when it comes to war. Like that does bother me a little bit.
Yeah. Yeah. I like that take, man. Yeah. It's a kind of fetishization, if that's a word. They're fetishizing war and everything that goes along with it. Yeah. I like that. What do you mean by how does, if you're not having fun, why do it? What does that have to do with anything?
I mean, so I think a lot of people either get into training for the wrong reasons or keep training for the wrong reasons, where it becomes less of something that contributes to someone's life and more of just like, I guess, almost an addiction where, you stopped liking it 5 years ago. Everything hurts. You don't want to go to the gym, but it's just like a huge part of your identity. And now
Mm-hmm.
you feel like you have to,
Mm-hmm.
Um, whereas like if you stepped back and had a little perspective, it's like, dude, you're not going to get anything tangible out of this. Like you're not going to get paid for being good at lifting weights,
Mm-hmm.
unless you're like the very best and win some money at the current U.S. Open or something like
Mm-hmm.
that. But that's 0.0001% of people. So like if you're Yuri Belkin and you know don't like powerlifting anymore, but you might still win a $40,000 check every year for being best lifter at a big money meet, fine, whatever, I get it. But like, I think a lot of people get into lifting less to better themselves and more kind of like out of a sense of shame almost, where they feel like there's something wrong that they will fix by lifting weights. Which I don't think people need to have positive motivations for everything. Like, I think if that's what gets your foot in the door to begin with, that's certainly better than not getting your foot in the door. But I think a lot of people don't move past that. And then I think a lot of people who do get into lifting for the right reasons, just to better themselves, they try it, they enjoy it, they're like, oh, I'm going to stick with this.
Mm-hmm.
It can become almost like pathological eventually, where if you know if you would have said to if you could go back in time and say to the version of yourself who'd been lifting for 6 months, like, hey, 10 years from now, here's how you're going to feel every time you go to the gym, they'd say, well, fuck, I'm not doing this, um whereas like if you could keep a little more perspective and realize like, hey, I don't like this anymore. Like, I'm not enjoying any part of this process. It's probably not healthy anymore, but maybe if you could just change your training style and now suddenly, it feels more comfortable to work out, you can start making progress doing something else. It's a little fun again. That could be healthy and productive, but people just stick with the particular style of training that they like build a personality around almost. And just stick with it to a point that, I mean, it's certainly not fun and probably not healthy,
right. Yeah, it's funny whenever people ask me something about something like, what do you do when you lack motivation? For the most part, it's like, find something else that you actually like to do or love to do, and you don't deal with that problem. I have this really high level CrossFit Games athlete that's come to me a number of times and said, I hate training. I don't even like the competitions anymore. My body feels like shit. What do you think I should do? And for years in a row, I've just been like, look, you probably need to quit and you should think about some other options for yourself. And this person has not been able to do so for exactly the reasons that you're talking about. I think it's so deeply entrenched in their identity that for so long they've been so focused on one goal that they haven't been open to other possibilities in their life. So they don't even know or believe that there are other options that could be fulfilling.
No, for sure. I definitely agree. I mean, like for myself, I generally want to lift heavy shit. Like, I'm into powerlifting because that is how I enjoy exercising. Like, that's what it is to me. Like, I love the process. And when I don't, I just like go play basketball for a few months because I love basketball. I generally feel similarly about basketball as lifting. Like, I work in the fitness industry. A lot of people pay attention to me because I'm strong. So it's like, most of the time, if I had to choose one or the other, go lift weights.
Right.
But then when I'm just super fed up about it, I mean, ultimately, I train because I enjoy it and because it gives value to my life. Not like it gives my life value, but I feel like I'm expressing myself poorly. It just makes my life more fulfilling. Like, it's fun. And when it's not doing that for me, just fuck it. I'm gonna go to the hardwood for a few months, and then when I feel motivated to train again, like, come back to the gym, start lifting. Like, it's like, I'm not saying everyone needs to feel about training the same way I do, but I do think a lot of people severely lack perspective and don't even question their motivations for what they do, and don't ever stop to ask themselves what they're actually trying to get out of it and why.
So you're 27 years old. Why do you think you're asking yourself those types of questions at this age? It's usually, I feel like most people don't gain that type of perspective until maybe the middle of their life. What makes you so drawn to depth?
I don't know. I mean, so as far as lifting goes, I mean, I've been at it for close to 14 years, close to 15 years. So I mean, I think I have more perspective on like the lifting side of things than a lot of people my age, just because I've been doing it for a lot longer than a lot of people my age. Um, then I guess just in terms of thinking about stuff in general, I mean, I guess I'm somewhat introspective. I don't know, like it's just kind of how I'm wired.
Let me know if you figure it out, what the spark was.
Sure.
Cool, man. I've got a few more questions for you.
So I do think, um, so I talked about like having a scientific posture and assuming you're wrong about a lot more than most people are willing to admit they might be wrong about. And I do think that helped me a lot. Um, so I think that my perspective on a lot of stuff started shifting when I was like 23, like 22, 23, and was starting to read research a lot more. Um, and so a book that's not about how you think about things, but that I think helped with how I think about things a lot is a book called What Is This Thing Called Science by Chalmers. It's like a philosophy of science book. Um, and I think that helped me not not just with reading research, but with kind of understanding the research process and all that stuff. And yeah, I think it made me more willing to be introspective, realize that whatever my perspective is on anything, it's necessarily a limited perspective, and that it one of the things I started doing is when I realized that me and someone else view things completely differently, not just we have different opinions about stuff, but the way we arrived at those opinions seems to, be derived from fundamentally different values and worldviews. Um, to stop and question that and not just assume that I'm right and the other person is wrong. And I think that just kind of spilled over into virtually everything. Um, just being more willing to like examine what my subconscious drives and motivations are. Because I mean, yeah, I think a lot of people just don't think about why they do stuff. Um, they just have like natural processes they go through. Like maybe it's innate, maybe it's how they were raised. They don't really stop to question it. They have like goals and desires, but don't ask themselves like, well, why do I want this? Like, what is motive? So like they take one step back. They're willing to ask like, oh, like I'm behaving in this way. Well, what goal is that directed towards? But then they don't take the next step back and say, well, why do I have that goal and why do I value this thing in the first place? And I think just kind of recognizing that there was that additional step back that one could take helped me a lot.
That's beautiful, man. I really, really love what you said about kind of observing, like taking an opposing view and really really sitting with it and trying to dissect it. It reminds me of I know a lot of debaters will do the same, like take a Republican party candidate. They will go and study, a debater will go and study the Democratic side so that they can have a better argument. They have a more like holistic or full-fledged argument. But in everything else, it seems like it can just teach you a different perspective.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, for sure.
So when you find someone like that, do you go and have a conversation with them, or do you just sit, like you look at the research and look at how they got there and just sit with it on your own?
Depends on the situation and depends on the person. Um, so oftentimes you don't see that someone is processing things super differently from you until they get like really mad. And then that like extra little bit of what is behind just the surface level stuff they're saying comes out. And then at that point they're generally not in a state where it would be good to have a conversation with them. And then by the time they've calmed down, they often don't want to have a conversation about whatever it is. So yeah, I mean, sometimes if someone's like relatively chill, and especially if I'm like drinking with someone and we both have a few drinks in us, then that generally goes pretty well for conversations. Right. But a lot of times it's just observing people and getting an idea of what they're thinking based off of what they're saying, and in like the latent assumptions behind the things they're saying and the arguments they're making. I also, I don't know. I don't have that many conversations with people. Like I wouldn't say I'm shy. I mean, I'm definitely not shy, but I think like when I pull a thread, I want to pull it all the way. And oftentimes I don't have the time to do that with someone else. And so like, I can lay awake in bed at night for like 2 or 3 hours stewing on something. But if I'm like in the middle of a work day or like in the middle of a workout and I either like see something or I hear someone say something that makes me think like, oh, okay, like that's interesting. I don't want to have like a partial conversation with them and, chat about it for 10 minutes. And I don't have the time at that point to, sit down and have like a 3-hour conversation with someone. So yeah, it's often not in conversation.
Gotcha, man. So as someone that doesn't do a lot of or any long-term like visioning or kind of forward thinking, I think you said something like that at the beginning. How do you think about your career going forward?
I just outsource that to my wife.
Nice. Smart, man.
Yeah, we work together. Yeah. I manage the content side of things. She manages the business side of things. And she's much more of a planner.
That's great, man. Do you love what you do?
Yeah, it's great. I was going to say I couldn't see myself doing anything else, and I definitely could. But of the various things I could see myself doing, I think this is what I want to do. Yeah, it's great.
You have any advice for people who can't say that? Maybe they hate what they do, or they just feel like they're just a little unhappy with their careers.
I mean, I'm probably not the best person to give advice on this. I happened into what I do now by luck as like the first thing I did after I graduated college. So here comes advice with no perspective behind it. I think that I do think it's worth asking some of those questions about like what is it that you actually want, and what is it about your current situation that you don't like? Because the thing is, like, I think life does just kind of suck a little bit. Like, in people. So if you look at the research on happiness and satisfaction, people tend to way overestimate how good and bad things will feel before they happen, and how long things will affect them. So if you look at like how happy folks think winning the lottery will make them, they think it's going to be the best thing that ever happened to them. After they win the lottery, they're much happier for like 3 to 6 months, and then they establish a new normal. If like a spouse dies, people think that that's going to absolutely crush them forever, and they are considerably less happy for between like 6 months and 2 years, and then they hit a new baseline and basically back to where they were before. So I think that a lot of people are unhappy and dissatisfied because they expect their life to be happier and more satisfying almost. And they kind of have like a sense of FOMO about something that doesn't actually exist. Like no one is happy and satisfied all the time, and if you think that that's how you should be, that will probably make you less happy and less satisfied. um, and so, I mean, I think some people are unhappy because they expect to be happier.
Mm-hmm.
And I mean, beyond that, like, I mean, if your job sucks and your existence is just generally soul crushing, I'm not the best person to give advice on that because, I mean, like things have been pretty decent for me.
Dude, I think that's phenomenal advice. Actually, the first being expect life to have ups and downs. I had a fascinating conversation with someone who lived in Amsterdam for 5 to 7 years, but she is from Austin and spent most of her life in the States. And she said that she likes working. She's kind of like a therapist or a coach of some sort. And she says she likes working with her European clients so much more because they have, she called it, more depth to them. They appreciate the kind of the negatives and the shadow side of things just as much as the positive. And she thinks that people in North America tend to just be constantly striving for feelings of bliss and euphoria and just like pure ecstasy, right? We just always want the next best thing. We want to be so happy all of the time. And I don't know, that really resonated with me because I've definitely felt that way most of my life. And as I get older, I'm realizing like no matter how hard I work, no matter how successful I am, I still have these moments of sadness and anger, and life just happens. Something gets in my way. And I think if we can expect that to happen and realize that it's possible to accept those moments of difficulty, I think I don't know. I think life is a lot more manageable and stress-free.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, so I think I think a lot of people are stressed because like, so I would want to make a distinction between like financial stress and like personal and like interpersonal stress, because like, I mean, God, median wages in the US have been pretty stagnant since like the 70s. And like a lot of places, cost of living is going up quite a bit. Like a lot of people are feeling squeezed, and that's not something that I feel can be alleviated just by your perspective changing,
right.
You know? But I think that a lot of like the interpersonal stuff, a lot of people are expecting like a big thing to happen that will make a big difference in their life, and often don't pay enough attention to the things that they do have control over that could make their life a little bit better. So like, I mean, a simple thing is just like going out of your way to have a good relationship with your coworkers. So, I mean, whatever you do, if you're working with other people, just doing everything you can to like them and have a good relationship with them. Whatever job you're doing, that automatically makes it better. Same thing with like the people in your life outside of work. Like if all of those little interactions are slightly better every single day, I mean, it's not going to be a night and day difference, but it will make your current existence probably better than it currently is. And I mean, yeah, but if it's a matter of like you're super stressed all the time because you don't make that much money and you have to pay for like the rising costs of insulin, I mean, that's just kind of a shitty situation. And I don't think, I mean, it would be nice if everyone, it would be nice if everyone in the real world could actually take like the Gary Vee approach of like, oh, I'll just work 90 hours a week and never sleep and get like 40 side hustles or whatnot. But like, you know, that's not something you can start overnight if you're already like 50 grand in debt and don't make enough money to make ends meet. So that's I think it's a little too easy for people like us who have been reasonably successful to say to everyone who's like stressed and not feeling good, like, oh, it's mindset, blah blah. And I'm not saying you do this, but I'm saying like just people in general, to say like, oh, it's like mindset, or like, hey, just go back to school and like get a degree to do what you want to do, which also may not necessarily be feasible for someone who, you know, maybe already has 2 jobs to make ends meet because they have kids.
Right.
And yeah, like, I mean, some people, their life sucks because of poverty, and there's not a clear way out for a non-negligible number of them.
Right.
But
yeah, I really appreciate that, man. Dude, this has been great. You have a really refreshing voice in the strength and conditioning world. I appreciate what you're up to, dude.
Oh, is this the end?
This is the end.
All right, dude. Well, thanks for having me on.
Hell yeah, man. Where can people find out more about
Sorry
you?
for ending on such a down note.
Oh, that was my fault.
Fair enough. You can eat that one.
Yeah, exactly. I ask the questions around here. Where can people find more about your books and everything you've got going on?
StrongerByScience.com for the podcast, sbspod.com. Products are on the site. Research review I put out every month with Eric Helms, Eric Trexler, and Mike Sordos. It's called Monthly Applications in Strength Sport, or MASS for short. That's strongerbyscience.com/mass. And social media wise, I'm probably the most active on Instagram these days. So personal account is at Greg Nuckols. Business account is at official Stronger by Science.
You're the man, Greg. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
This episode is finished, but your training journey continues. Head over to brutestrengthraining.com/SSW and grab your free pack of 32 accessory workouts that you can incorporate into your training and start improving your strength immediately. That's brutestrengthraining.com/SSW.